What's up, everybody? I'm Risa Morimoto. Welcome to Modern Aging. Happy Saturday. It is 12 noon, and it is a beautiful day in New York. The sun is shining, and we're all in good moods, and everybody's out when they should not be. But today, we are in session 5 of this 6-part workshop on mindfulness. This has been so amazing. If you haven't caught any of it, I would love for you to check back on the first 4 sessions. We've been learning a lot and getting a lot of insight from Michelle Maldonado, who is our teacher and guide. And as she says, life is not just worth living, it is worth living fully. And that is so true on so many levels. And I think that right now, during this time of isolation and quarantining at home and sheltering in place, I think that we are kind of we're forced to look within ourselves and discover a little bit more about what we want and what we don't want in our lives. Session 1 and 3, session 1 through 4, we talked about it's okay not to be okay. We talked about moving from fear to empowerment, embracing the now. And it was Wednesday, we talked about ways to connect in times of physical distancing. Today, we're going to focus on wise action. And I think this is super important and so much of what we need right now in terms of establishing good, better, healthy habits and routines and have ready resources. Next Wednesday, just so you know, is going to be our final session, and that's going to be at 7 p.m. Eastern, and that session is going to be on compassion and presence, something I think that we all need a little bit more of right now, and so how we manage what's going on now and prepare for what's next. So I am going to bring on my friend Michelle. Michelle, you good? Don't be coughing. Are you coughing?
Yes,
You make me nervous.
I am coughing. My allergies are out of control today. But good afternoon, everybody. Hi, Risa. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Hi, Annie. Nice to see you, Paul.
Actually,
Yeah.
I forgot to introduce you. So let me just give, for anybody who may be new to the sessions, Michelle is the founder and CEO of Lucencia, which is a company that helps leaders find mindful transformation. She's a certified mindfulness teacher, as well as a certified emotional intelligence practitioner, teacher, guide. I feel like I'm introducing you for some game show or something. And your website is lucencia.com. Oh, take it away, Miss Maldonado.
All righty. Well, thank you, and welcome back to those who have been joining us in some of the previous sessions. And if this is your first time, welcome. We're glad that you are here, regardless of whether this is your first or your 5th time. Today, as Risa mentioned, we're going to talk about creating healthy habits and having ready resources and routine, but not just routine for the sake of routine, creating habits that we really can stick with, and even ones that we might find a little bit of delight in when we kind of use the framework that we're going to talk about today, that allows us to give us some rewards too. Because I don't know about you, but I like to have rewards. I like them as much as I can, but so that they don't kind of wear themselves out and they don't have the same effect, we got to pace them out. We got to use them strategically. So before we dig into how to create that healthy habit, I want to talk a little bit about what the brain does. And if you have tuned in to some of the other sessions, we kind of sprinkle in a little bit of neuroscience with each session, because I think it's important for us to understand not just what we think and how we behave, but some of the biology around why we do it. We're predispositioned, we're predisposed, and we are hardwired for some of these things that we do. But don't lose faith or hope. Just because we're hardwired a certain way doesn't mean we can't intervene and shift things to create a new normal. So let's take a look at our first slide, which talks about this really interesting concept and research that was done by Regina Pali. And she has an incredible article, and you can do a search on the internet for it. It's called The Predicting Brain. And it is chock full of juicy and delicious information. I've mentioned a couple of times I'm a little bit of a data research geek. And if any of those on here today are also feeling the same kind of way, you might enjoy this. But here's essentially what it says. It says that our brain works in such a way that it essentially helps us to live the future we expect. So that might sound like a really phenomenal, incredible thing. But in some instances, it can be very limiting. Now, first, the brain operates in what we call sort of a perception action cycle. So our perception is the first thing. It's how we look at the world, how we view and interpret things. And oftentimes we think perception is truth. There is this amazing illustration that I saw one time. I think it's done by the futurists, and it has two people standing on either sides of a couple of logs of wood. And there is this optical illusion that depending on which side of the logs of wood you're standing on, you see 3 versus 4 logs. And you see the people arguing back and forth, no 3, no 4, no 3, no 4. Well, the reality is, from their perspective, from their vantage point, they see what they see, and it is their truth. Now, what's this based on? It is based on our subjective experiences, and many times that help formulate the lens through which we view, through which we navigate, and through which we experience the world. And so that's an important point for us to know, because in times like what we're dealing with now, that can be more extreme on the spectrum versus times where we're not operating in a pandemic, but we might have a little challenge at work. The lens through which we meet both types of experiences can be colored by something as simple as, when I was younger, I never had X. Like, I never had enough food. I was always afraid I wouldn't have enough food, or we barely could keep a roof over our houses. So something could trigger our safety and security, can cause us to look at things from a fear-filled position. Or if we were very comfortable, perhaps it doesn't trigger us at all. But it all plays a part. Now, the reason I say this is because not only does it color how you interpret it and how you feel about it, but consider how it also influences how you view others. So I think there's, if everybody can think of a moment where they've watched the news and they've seen coverage of places where people aren't wearing, there's a mixture of places where people simultaneously are not wearing masks and gloves, and those who are, all in the same place. And the perspective of some people may be that it's not as necessary as we think, because in their history and their sort of mindset, things have been different for them. They don't cause a panic. The same fear doesn't arise, and the same concern. So I don't want to suggest that wearing gloves and a mask is fueled by fear, but it is also something that can be triggered in people. It is also, depending on where your mindset is, something that allows us to be responsible and accountable to ourselves and others. So it simply depends on what your lens is through which you're viewing all of this. And the brain, because we've learned before that neurons that wire together fire together, meaning what we think, do, and pay attention to repeatedly over time starts to create these grooves or these highways of circuitry in the brain. And so we just start thinking that way all the time. We start behaving that way all the time. So interruption is important because this perception, these predictions can alter perception.
How difficult would you say is it to disrupt those perceptions or disrupt those, habits that we have, those judgments or whatever it may be that's going on in our head?
I think for some people it's easier than others. The first step is to be aware that it's even happening, because many times we sit in a place of, we know this, so we're certain, and then we judge. Yes. So we're standing in judgment and certainty, as opposed to using healthy and wise discernment about what's really happening. If we're aware, and we referenced this in some of the earlier parts of the series, that cultivating our self-awareness, awareness of others, and awareness of our environment helps us really know when those kinds of things show up so that we can take a moment and choose differently.
Mm-hmm.
So once we become aware, we have an immediate opportunity to challenge the assumption and choose differently. Or it may not be that we need to choose differently, but we can augment what it is we're perceiving with additional information that might be present. But it's not just enough to be aware, as we all know. Like, I know there are certain things I need to do. Awareness alone doesn't cut it. It has to be followed by action, but responsible, healthy, wise action. And we're going to actually get into that piece, Risa, to show like, okay, how do we disrupt it? First, we got to know it's even there. Then when we know, what action can we take? But before we do that, I really want to show you something interesting in case you're not quite believing that the brain is predictive, that it fills in gaps where things don't actually exist because it's trying to give you as much information as it can. So when things are missing, based on prior experience, the brain will fill it in. So let's go to the next slide, Risa. And this slide is what is called the Kinesa effect. And I want to ask, as you are sitting here, look at this image and think about how many triangles do you see? Risa, how many triangles do you see?
Oh, come on, Michelle. There's two. Well, we just talked about this.
Yes.
Of course, I see two.
Anybody else see two?
Actually, I'm not sure. I have this going live on Facebook as well. And if somebody is watching on Facebook, if they can comment, just so I know that you're able to see it, that would be helpful. Technology. But I'm sorry, go ahead. So so if anybody sees two triangles, then you're on Team Risa.
Yeah. And if you see no triangles, then I don't know what to tell you. But so let me tell you something here about the brain science around the predicting brain. So this research was discovered actually by an Italian researcher. And his last name, of course, was Kinesa. Yeah. And here's what this is reflecting to us, this beautiful predicting brain. Many people would say that there are two triangles, one marked by a black outline that has a white triangle overlay. But in fact, there is only, thank you, I see people are looking at the smaller triangles. Yes, I should have been more clear. Two large. You guys are just brilliant geniuses. I didn't anticipate that. So here in this particular experiment, they're looking at two large triangles is what people typically say they see. Now, the challenge here is that there actually is no white triangle that was drawn here. What happens is the triangle with the black outline was broken up. The lines were broken up. And then three black circles were put around the outside, around the perimeter. And the brain is looking at the lines are broken. What's in the space? There are these three dots. And so in this particular research, the neuroscientists now extracting forward realize that the brain is filling in the pieces it thinks should be there based on its best judgment and the information it has. So it knows it's working with geometric shapes. It knows that one's a triangle, one's a circle, and they're looking to see how do I create this? And the brain probably already tried to draw a circle and it didn't make sense. So what must be logical is the triangle. So the Kinesa effect demonstrates that the brain will fill in when there is missing information, its best guesstimate of what should be there. And in this case, our brain will show us, there'll be a perception that there is a white triangle, but no white triangle was actually drawn. Now, I encourage you. I find
it's always like, whenever I look at it, I'm like, what? But it's true.
That's right. And it's really interesting because think about walking down the street. Think about, an easier way to look at this is say you're sitting in a coffee shop And instead of getting a cup of coffee in a paper cup, you've got it in a little mug, like a ceramic mug. But in front of your mug, maybe your laptop is open and it's hiding a little piece of your mug. Well, your brain automatically assumes the rest of the shape of the mug, even though it can't see it. And so when you go for your mug, you see a whole mug because you know it's there. So it just fills in something from the very mundane, the very simple. Same thing happens when somebody's standing behind a car and you're on the other side. You know the full body is there. You can see it in your mind's eye. It all fills in when the details are either absent or obscured to the best of its ability. Now, this is the kind of thing that really has helped us in many ways. It's helped us to survive and thrive in times of crisis where we need to think really quickly. Mm-hmm. We are presented with a number of scenarios, and the brain tries to pick the best one. So it's not that it's a bad thing. The challenge, just as I was saying, I think in the second session that we did around mindful awareness and embracing the now, is that if we don't challenge or sort of expand our awareness, there is so much information that we may not see that limits our awareness of what actually is present. And when that happens, there are potentially opportunities, resources, and solutions that don't come to our awareness. And so we're always trying to figure out how do we, again, broaden the awareness. And broadening the awareness is a disruption of our neurobiology, our predicting brain, our tendency to rely on our negativity bias or any of our biases. Those are also often hardwired into our physiology as well. So we're disrupting all the time with intention so that we can always ask ourselves what else might be present. So with that, I want to, go ahead.
I would imagine it's actually pretty hard to kind of live in that same state of predictability. Like it takes as much work to disrupt as it does to kind of continue on, I feel like, to have the same kind of judgments or to have the same kind of, like, once you're aware of this sort of thing, it's kind of like people who are always filled with hate, right? Or are very negative. Like it takes a lot of energy to be that way as well.
It does. And this isn't to suggest that you're constantly every single one, because some of them you're just not going to be aware of. And some of them it's okay. Like some of them you want to do. Okay, I want to brush my teeth without necessarily thinking about every single step. I want to put out the pan and know that when I put the top on it, there are some things that it's okay, that become natural habit. It promotes efficiency, and the brain is trying to be efficient. So there are many things. This is why it's a really beautiful thing. It's just that when we get in circumstances that require us, that really invite us to think more openly, to be more receptive to, for example, new ideas, or as we are talking about today, the new way of living, being, doing through habit change that's sustainable. That's why this part about the predicting brain and our tendency to just kind of fill things in and to be aware that our perception is informed by our experiences is important, because it will impact how we experience the habit change process. So it takes effort, but we don't need to disrupt it every single time. That would be exhausting, and nobody would do it.
Right.
We'd just fall apart, fall in bed, and sleep it off as best we could. So why don't we talk a little bit about the way to disrupt it, this whole notion of creating healthy habit and its relationship to having ready resources. So
when you mean by ready resources, you mean like go-tos?
Yeah, go-to, yeah.
That you can, in order to create that disruption and make sure that it's a sustainable disruption, I guess, or something that tools, I guess, right?
Yes. We want to have resources at the ready, right? Sometimes we're going to have to, we don't really know what we don't know. And so sometimes we may have to research what might help in a particular moment. But there are some things when we're trying to create a habit, if we have resources at the ready to help us in the moment. We know where to go to. Like, I'm struggling with this. Okay, I already got my list together. I know that this is what I can do when this happens. So that helps to reinforce your ability to stay the course, to stay on track when you're trying to create healthy habit change. Mm-hmm. So yes, resources available that you know about, and then you'll grow that list because we learn as we continue. So let's take a look at the next slide, which talks about this by Charles Duhigg, who is the author of a book called The Power of Habit. I don't know if anybody has ever read that book. It's pretty good, and it lays out a really interesting framework to help us understand how to actually make habit change stick. And very much like, for example, the meditation practices and frameworks that we shared in earlier sessions, you have got to be willing and flexible and curious enough to make it so that it will attract and sort of speak to your psyche. So you ever heard anybody say, oh, this worked for me, this worked perfectly, you got to try this, and then you're like, that doesn't do anything for me, right? Because you've tried to take somebody else's framework and you haven't massaged it to fit you, your way of thinking, being, doing, and your lifestyle. That's not to say that it should be easy, not to say that just because it's a little challenging that it doesn't work. It's just that if you don't make the tweaks, it won't be sustainable. You won't be able to sustain it oftentimes. And we see this a lot with people who do frequent dieting. Mm-hmm. It can be hard to sustain. We keep it for a while, and then there are a number of factors that can go into why that happens. But oftentimes it's the process also that is so rigid that there's not enough wiggle room to kind of adapt to what it is that you need to do to make it sustainable for you. So let's take a look first from the brain science piece. There are two areas of the brain that I want to bring to your attention. There's so much going on in the brain, and so this is an oversimplification. But what's really interesting is that when something is a habit, it kind of rests. It's sort of that subconscious or unconscious processing, so that the steps in the habit they just happen automatically. And the brain, because it's predicting, will then predict the next step, and it just kind of happens seamlessly. That's when it becomes a habit. And it sits in that area that you see called the basal ganglia. And the basal ganglia is not a single spot in the brain. It's an aggregation of a couple of different things. In order for us to disrupt the habit, we have to have conscious choice and engage the part of the brain that's called the prefrontal cortex. And you can see that as a dot on the silhouette of the human head. And that sits right behind the forehead. And when you engage the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that's actually one of the youngest parts of our brain, but it evolved, thankfully, to our benefit because it helps with reasoning, executive functioning, decision-making, those kinds of things. And so we have to engage that consciously and with choice to be able to then bring in habit that sits newly in the basal ganglia. So how do we do that? When we look at the work of Charles Duhigg, he has this really interesting framework that starts with three key things. There's a fourth that's really important too that we'll get to in a second. But it's this cue, routine, reward loop. So the cue is that trigger. It's that thing that makes you want to do or engage in a habit that you're trying to change. The routine is the activity or the behavior that you engage in after the cue is brought to your attention. And then the reward is why you keep doing it. What are you getting out of it that in your mind feels like, oh, this is so good? So I'll give you an example. I love coffee. I love coffee. I always tell people my mouth loves it, but my stomach doesn't. And my body doesn't process the caffeine very well. So I actually end up with terrible stomach aches and things if I drink coffee every day. But it's really hard. It's awful.
And you still
So
drink it.
I, I do different things, and I don't always drink specifically coffee. I have coffee alternatives. I do a whole bunch of different stuff so that when I do have coffee, it's a treat. But here's how a cue routine reward system could work. Say I get up, I get in my car, I drive by Starbucks. That's my cue. Ooh, coffee. My routine is I pull in to the drive-thru, I grab my coffee. That's the routine. And then the reward is I drink my coffee. And the aroma, the smell, the temperature, the taste. That's my reward. So how do I disrupt my cue so that behavior and that reward doesn't happen every time that cue shows up? And so here's what you have to do is you have to really get specific about isolating the proper cue. And I always thought it was driving by Starbucks, but it could be bacon and eggs, because who doesn't have coffee with bacon and eggs? I've realized that's another cue, right? So you have to isolate what it is. And so, so when a cue happens, you've isolated it, you may want to then begin to trigger something else. You can change the routine. And so an example for this one would be, I may drive by Starbucks, but instead of getting a coffee, I might get a tea. Or instead of stopping, I may just keep driving. But I have to figure out what's my routine, and the reward has to be big enough to entice me. So I'm going to give you another example.
I don't know if tea is going to quite do it if you love coffee. It's
a hard transition for those, coffee lovers, and for myself.
Yeah,
what
me,
I
it's
often
sugar.
do is defer, so I don't drink it every day. And then I use coffee as a treat, like a dessert. I don't drink it at night because I'll be up all night, but I use it as a treat. But here's an even better one. I was explaining this, Risa and I were talking this morning about rewards. And so one of the things that I do was when I work out, I have this really lovely smelling body wash that is organic and a little bit more on the expensive, the higher end of price. And it's beautiful. It's like peonies and roses. I love floral scents. And I only get to use that on days that I work out. So the shower I take after I work out. So I'm actually, in this case, in the coffee case, I'm trying to break a habit. In the workout case, I'm trying to create a habit. So the cue is I get up and I know that I have an alarm set on my calendar, like it's time to work out. That's my cue until I can do it on my own. And then the routine is I get up, I do my walking loop, or I exercise down in my basement or whatever it is, but I have to do movement. And the reward is I get to use that body wash. And I love it. And then on days where I don't work out, I don't get to use it. I have to use something else that is pretty bland. And I make sure the other one isn't as nice. It gets the job done, but it's not as nice.
So would you say that's an actual motivator for you?
It is. And it can be different for different people. So you have to figure out, you have to isolate the cue. You have to then create new behavior after the cue. And the thing that really gets you is the reward has to be valuable enough to motivate you to take action. Now, this whole action piece is really important. But oftentimes we might be able to do the action in the beginning, and then all of a sudden we kind of trail off, right? So the other piece of the cycle that Duhigg talks about that's critically important is community. So we can't really create any sustainable change likely without enough community. And in that community it's at least one other person who can support the change that you can be accountable to, that can help hold you accountable. And in that community, there are also resources that are ready and at your fingertips. And the resources piece can be around the reward, the community, all kinds of places in the cycle.
So when you say community, you mean just friends or family, or just like, is that one person? Is that a group of people? Is that?
it can be one person. Sometimes people just need a person. And sometimes you need a couple of people. So you may find other people who are doing something similar. So that's why things like, workout classes at fitness centers often tend to work better, because you're doing it with other people, or like the weight loss programs, or kind of group counseling, or when you're doing with other people, oftentimes it can help you, because deep down inside, even though we are hardwired to scan for threat, we have negativity bias, we have all these things, we're also hardwired to be connected. We want to feel connected with people, and community does that. So changing habit with community support begins to shift things in a way that helps it be sustainable for each and every one of us. And the other thing is that we have to exercise self-kindness and self-compassion. And that is one of the things we've talked about in our previous series. This piece has to be integral. It has to be grounded very firmly in this whole process. And it's not to say to be soft on yourself or to give yourself all this slack so you actually don't create the habit. But it is saying that you have to recognize that it's not going to go smoothly for most people. Most people, there are very few people like, I just make my mind up and I do it. Done. Period. Very few people are that disciplined, that effective. I do know a few. I don't know how they do it. But for the rest of the world, we fall. We fall off the bike. We got to get back on. And so we have to have some patience, some kindness and compassion, and then persistence to keep going. So the cue, the routine, the reward, the community, the self-compassion and kindness, and sprinkled throughout each of those parts of the phase is our resources that help us along the way. Now let's talk about what resources might be. Resources can be anything from something in writing like articles, or an outline or framework of a schedule that you're keeping for the day to help keep you on track. It can be things that bring you joy, actually. If you get motivated, say, to work out when you're listening to music, then let that be a resource for you. If you don't know how to shift your nutrition, then seek out healthy recipes or YouTube channels that show cooking, or these are the resources can be vast. And part of the magic is doing a little digging and researching to see what best supports you, understanding that the resources may shift over time. Once you kind of lock something in, you're like, I don't really need that resource anymore. I'm actually doing pretty good with that, but I do need X now. And so being nimble and flexible with what the resources are, what they look like, and how they may transition depending on what stage or phase of the habit creation or anchoring process that you may find yourself in.
And resources can be other people also, right? If you know some mentor or whatever. I mean, what do you do in terms of, like, what about like addiction? Like, you're addicted to, I'll just say sugar, because I know I'm addicted to sugar. That's something simple and probably pretty well. And you get triggered, or you have your cues and your routine, and I find that it's really hard once you're triggered to divert, right? I think that it's, for some people, I would say, like, if they don't get triggered, like if they can try to avoid the trigger, like not going down the ice cream aisle or whatever to begin with, because they know it's there, it helps.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's sort of part of the process as well, or
I think that's a great question, because I'm practical. That's my own made up word, practical and tactical. And here's the thing. When we start to create the routine part, or transform that, it may be in the beginning that instead of having a bowl of ice cream, that we have a little cup. We may have to ratchet ourselves down over time. So you're shifting very slowly the routine. Some people can rip the Band-Aid right off, But some of us may need to slowly shift the routine, and that is okay too. So, and sugar is a hard one because everything we buy has sugar in it. Even the stuff that's supposed to be really, really healthy for you has sugar in it. So, you can begin to learn to educate yourself about the types of sugars in food and figure out which sugars are better for you, so to speak, than others, and begin to shift the food intake to incorporate those and phase out the others over time. So all of it can be done in a phased fashion. Now, in terms of the reward, when that happens, in the case of the ice cream is your reward. You just
I know, that's the problem.
But your portion size is going to be adjusted. And that's okay, because I am not, unless there's some extenuating health or other circumstances, I'm not a believer that you have to strip out everything. It's all or nothing. I think moderation is important. It's key. And then you can also ask for help. There are lots of nutritional experts and guides and coaches and things that can really help you. I think nutrition is one of the hardest. I think nutrition and exercise are two of the hardest ones that people grapple with, because the world makes it easy to not do either. But the world also makes it easy to change. It's once we've been lulled in and created that habit, that's the challenge we have, is breaking out of that and creating a new normal. And that takes, from my personal experience, that takes a lot of persistence, takes a lot of willpower and dedication. And that's why that reward has to be so wonderful in the community. And the community, yes, Risa, can be a resource as well.
Yeah, I think that once you find a reward that's bigger than the ice cream, whether it's feeling really good and healthy, not feeling, not needing the sugar rush and then coming off of the sugar rush, is key. I've been reading a lot about sugar and health and its relation to health and that sort of thing. So it's interesting that you talk about resources and stuff, and because I became so curious about it because I was addicted. I'm eating less of it, but reading more and more about it, you realize how crazy addicted we all are as a society and how damaging it is on so many levels. And really, and it's pervasive. It's crazy. It really is in everything. Like, people need to learn how to read labels better and stuff,
right. Yeah, it's in things you wouldn't expect to have sugar. Yeah. You're just like, really? That has sugar in it? No. Why does it have that much sugar in it? It can be it is challenging. And the other thing, though, I just want to say is that, so for example, going back to the ice cream example, my son, I have a teenage son, he would get a big bowl. And it was like he would eat, dump out half the tub of ice cream into his bowl. And then we had to say, well, you can still have ice cream, but you have to have a smaller amount. So when I do ice cream, I have a very little cup that often is used to melt butter or something. And I put a little bit of ice cream, like a couple of tablespoons full in that instead of a big bowl. And then that's my reward. But what I've done is changed the routine. The cue was, I really want that ice cream. I just saw the ice cream when I opened the freezer. The routine was used to get a huge bowl. Now it's like 2 tablespoons or 3 tablespoons. And my reward is I still get my ice cream. So it may be, and then over time you can figure out what ice creams may be a little bit healthier for you, so that you don't have to, if it's really a love, you don't have to forsake it altogether. But how much you put into your body is important. And sometimes the reward, there were things that I would do before, and I love peanut M&Ms, for example.
I love peanut M&Ms.
They're the best. And I would do something when I was creating a new habit, and I went and got a big bag of peanut M&Ms, and I was allowed to have, it was supposed to be 1 peanut M&M after I did this thing. It ended up like, 3 is not too bad. And so I'd have 3. And then eventually I was like, a handful's not too bad. So that didn't work for me. But it might work for people who don't love it as much as I do, that a small piece of chocolate instead of an entire chocolate bar, if it's really good quality chocolate, will be enough, because if you eat it mindfully, this is the trick. You eat it slowly, you feel the texture, you smell it, you taste it with a level of awareness that maybe you're even noticing some of the other spices or ingredients, which, may not be ice cream. But when you do it like that, you find that you don't need as much to feel satisfied. And that's another trick as well. Eating, and you hear this, I say eating mindfully, but it also may be that's paired with eating a bit more slowly. So you really savor it in a way that's pretty satisfying and fulfilling.
I have a question.
Surely.
What would you say for people who don't even realize that their bad habit is toxic for them? Like, some people don't even, you know what I mean? So how do you help them to recognize that what their habit is a bad habit, and that it should, or that it should be changed? I don't even know.
Yeah,
It's just the way it is. That's how, people, right?
It is what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that one can be tough, especially if somebody doesn't think it's a bad habit.
Right.
They think it's fun. Like, oh, I've always eaten like this will be fine. Or I've always driven this way. Or I've always, fill in the blank. And I'm fine. Or my grandfather did this and he lived to 95. Right? I hear this one all the time. And here's what I will say. If it is someone that you have a relationship with, that you care about, have the conversation. But be thoughtful, be mindful, be kind and compassionate, so that it's not a conversation from a place of judgment. And depending on the relationship, it may be perceived or received as judgment. And that can make it very difficult to help somebody see. And all of it may be coming to play that makes the conversation a little bit more difficult. But if you can, or you can find little bits in articles like, hey, I came across this really interesting article or video, and share that. You have to remember too that you have to meet people where they're at. And it's always checking in on your own intention. Why are you really feeling like you need to say something? And making sure that your intention is pure and clear. Because if it's tainted with any kind of judgment, control, any of those things, it'll be felt for sure. People can perceive it even if it isn't there, but you just can do your part. You have to do your part. And sometimes, for example, I've mentioned several times that I have a teenage son. Sometimes if I want him to know something or to think about something, I don't tell him. I ask his aunt or his uncle or a grandparent to say, hey, can you talk with Jay about such and such? And then he'll be like, wow, that's a great idea. But if I say it, it's like, no, I'm good. Right. I'm fine. So true. He's a great kid, but it takes a village. That saying that it takes a village to raise a child. I just say it takes a village to do all kinds of things. And so if you're finding that someone is engaging in an unhealthy or toxic kind of behavior or pattern, sometimes it might take more than just you saying something. In fact, sometimes the best messenger isn't you. And trying to decipher and figure out who that is so the person can feel safe. Because habit change makes us feel a little vulnerable as well. And so the balance of message and messenger becomes very important. Now, here's what I'll say as a caveat to that is that sometimes a tough message is exactly the kick in the butt that we need. And sometimes it demotivates us even more. Again, it's just, you have to know your audience and you have to figure out the best way. And that's all saying that, some other kind of intervention, more professional or clinical intervention isn't required, not that kind of scenario. And the other thing is you can model it. We can model the behavior and people will pick up on that and then invite them into it, and let them engage with you without saying you should do this more or you shouldn't do that. It's just you model it, you show it to them, and you invite them to do something with you if it's, whatever the activity is. And then have, if you can, like meaningful conversation during the activity, because that will help reinforce the reward piece. Oh, this is actually pretty cool or pretty fun, or I feel better now. And then you can help in that way as well.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you,
So
Michelle.
you are welcome.
Lisa.
We are just at about time. And I wanted to let folks know that today that the resources for our session is consisting of 2 articles that talk about habit change and recap some of the things that we talked about. And the other that's going to be up shortly is an actual template for you to fill in to create a routine for the day. And I encourage you, even if you don't use this template, put it in your phone so that your workout schedule, your healthy break schedule, your nap or sleep schedule, like you've got blocks that you put in, and something that helps you stay focused, stay the course, and create community. So if you've got community, then maybe it's, hey, call so-and-so, or hey, text so-and-so, bring it all together. And in that document, there's also 3 links. One is to the National Institute of Health. It's their nutrition tools and resources, which gives a lot of things from nutrition to exercise to all kinds of things to help you create your own resources at your fingertips. And then CDC's Global Health and Nutrition resources, which are really good recipes and things to do around nutrition. And then finally, the National Institute on Aging, which is offers ideas and ways to have physical activity that's safe and that helps promote health and well-being in these years that we find ourselves in. So
that's awesome.
Yes.
And
so we hope you enjoy those.
So those will be up this afternoon. You can go to thisismodernaging.com. When you go to the homepage, there'll be a little pop-out that talks about the event. You could just click on there and it'll take you right to the events, or you just go to the events page within the site. And so next Wednesday, May 6th, I cannot believe we're in May already. My gosh. We're going to be talking about compassion and presence, managing now while preparing for what's next. Michelle, thank you so much. Hold on 1 second. Let me just turn you back on here. I just want to say thank you so much, and we'll see you all next Wednesday for our final session.
Fantastic. Thanks, Risa. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a great weekend.
You too.